Oh. Leona will have 5. Well, we're dedicating most of the time to audience input. So it's like an hour and 15 minutes, but we're dedicating most of the time. Nobody has presentations. Okay. They're queuing up for presentation. Student presentation. Yeah, it's all going through that. Yeah, Joel is. All right, guys, thank you for attending the panel for Take Action. We're going to start now. Sorry, we started a bit late. So me and Joel will be moderating this panel, and Joel will start with an introduction to the Nuclear Issues Study Group.
It is working. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Joel Lorimer from the Nuclear Issues Study Group. We're going to be talking about actions today, and want to let everybody know very briefly about some major projects we'll be working on in the next several years, the first of which is the next review for the mixed land waste fill, whatever it's called, the nuclear dump, which is in 2019, and Dave is going to address that. And in 2020, there's going to be a contingent of people from Australia, including Aboriginal people, who are planning to do walks at in various parts of the state to significant nuclear historical sites, Alamogordo, Los Alamos, etc., Church Rock. On the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think, Leona, are you going to talk a little bit more about that possibly? And then very quickly, we had a film scheduled for Friday night about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we didn't have time to show that. But it's listed in the program, and you can see it online. It's on YouTube if you search for the title of that film. I mention that because the treaty, which people have mentioned during the weekend, was the direct outgrowth of 3 international conferences on the medical and humanitarian impact of nuclear war. So these 3 significant conferences took place, and out of them arose the treaty. The film is graphic evidence of the effects of nuclear weapons. So just, if you have any desire to learn more about that information's available.
Thank you, Joel. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
I already did.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we're going to start the panel, and I'm going to be doing introductions for the panelists. Each of you panelists will have 10 minutes because we want audience input from the segueing from Clee's powerful presentation about direct action, because we want to hear more from you and what we can do together to, have no nukes here. We need resistance from everybody. And so I'll start with an introduction of myself. Denise Brown in Kiani do Tabahe Basistun Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Denise Brown. I'm an undergrad, a student of UNM of American Studies, and I am here supporting and coordinating with the Nuclear Issues Study Group. Yeah, and let's get this started, guys. So first we have is Patuch Gilbert from Pueblo of Acoma.
Good afternoon, folks. Where's everybody? I thought there was a much larger crowd than this, I guess. But this always occurs when events go on for 2-3 days. Okay, I'm talking about, and I asked a question and center my comments around this question. Why are not New Mexico citizens anti-nuclear? Because I see, and I live here, and you know, we're very involved in this anti-nuclear work at the local level, which is on against uranium. But yet, I look out at the general public, and I don't see New Mexico citizens being anti-nuclear. So, and thinking about it, and it's because of, and you know the answer really, and it's because of money and greed. And so the talks that have been happening these last couple of days, they've described that. And it's this phenomenon of New Mexico's addiction to nuclear money and nuclearism and nuclearization is very pervasive. And it's hard to counteract. So that even like, this glory, I guess, of being the birthplace of the atomic bomb is persistent in, I think, people's minds. So remember several years ago, was it 2015, when Congress and the New Mexico politicians were arguing and debating for recognizing the contributions of New Mexico to the atomic bomb. And so they enacted, and it's actually a law today, the Manhattan Historic National Project. And so Los Alamos and I think it was Oak Flats, and I'm not sure if it was Hanford, that have all been recognized by law as being nationally recognized historic places. And so the National Park Service and the Department of Energy manage this designation. And so in New Mexico, the citizens, I think, have this love-hate relationship with nuclearism. And look at the amount of monies that go into Llano and Sandia laboratories, and what other state has 2 immense national laboratories. I think this year, the Defense Authorization Act, I don't know if it's been signed, but had $4 billion in there for Llano. And then yesterday it was mentioned that Sandia's federal allocation is $3.2 billion. So you have this this $1 trillion business coming into New Mexico. And even the Congressional Budget Office, you know, just recently said, if America is going to upgrade its nuclear weaponry, it's going to take $1.2 trillion. And you can bet that the people at Sandia and Llano are just drooling over this prospect. And so again, you know, another instance of this huge amounts of money is coming in, is, as we all know, is WHIP. From the construction and the ongoing maintenance and implementation of it is huge. I think that just, was it this year, that just in subcontract work at WHIP was $44 million. There's just projects that goes into cleaning up the problems that were associated with it, and many other things that, and even I was listening to, I think, the news. even this legal challenge of New Mexico against DOE, you know, all they're talking about is money, 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 money. Let's get more money for the state. And so, the impetus for more money, I call it greed, really, is such that now we have been saying, some of the politicians and local citizenry in there, in Carlsbad, are saying, let's look at storing high nuclear radioactive waste. I mean, that's crazy. And so those possibilities always, I think, exist when people are demanding jobs. You know, they want tax revenues, and we get caught into that kind of capitalistic greed. Then, of course, we see Uranco. The uranium enrichment facility, when it was in construction in, 2015, the company had said that, oh, we've already spent $4 billion. And look at what we're paying I think it was in that same year. And it was about 44 million that went into the jobs, you know, local communities. And I believe that that's the reason, again, that we're looking at, that people consider in HOTEC or the waste controls facilities down there, all because of the desire for more money. And the other, I think, that we tend to maybe not remember is all the years of the 50 years of mining uranium and milling in where I'm from, in the Grants Mining District that occurred. So that today, even the citizens from Milan and Grants, they want in Roca Honda mine. That's the new mines that's been proposed at Mount Taylor. And several years ago, I'm with the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. I and a colleague of Mace, we went to go see Senator Clemente Sanchez. And of course, he's pro-uranium, pro-mines. And I really wanted to emphasize to him that, hey, you know, we're anti-nuclear. But I couldn't do that because even in my own community of Milan and Grants, it seems like we are not anti-nuclear. We're anti-uranium, we're anti-clean up legacy mines and mills, but are we really anti-nuclear? And it seems like and that's the impetus that I want to emphasize, is that we're not. And maybe the courage is to counteract the politicians and citizenry of all the towns and universities that get these monies needs to be really challenged. And the other area that I'm really haven't mentioned and neglected is the whole, I think, U.S. military establishment in New Mexico that also gets these huge chunks of money, you know, at the Kirkland Air Force Base and, you know, Holloman Air Force Base. And so even the storage of, they say, the world's largest collection of nuclear arsenals or bombs is right here on the edge of really the city at Kirkland Air Force Base. And and then I keep thinking about, well, what can we do to get the people in New Mexico against this nuclear addiction or against the nuclear monies? And that's an extreme challenge because how do you then? I remember when Senator Domenici really was the force behind more monies for Lana, more monies for Cindy, more monies for the university. And of course, then even today, I was asking, I don't know whether I was talking to Don Hancock about the current New Mexico congressional delegation. You know, they were supporting this year's defense authorization for LANO. And you know that they're going to continue to do that. And Representative Pierce, who's running for governor, we're going to have to pressure him, you know, about his stance on the tax bill, you know, his stance on these monies that are coming into the state. So I think what I just really want to emphasize is how do you motivate people to counteract this as mentality. One could be as an action is to encourage us to be anti-nuclear, to really talk about what is it to be anti-nuclear. I have a friend that works for the European counterpart of LANO is CERN. It's in Switzerland, the Center for Economic Research on Nuclear, and they differ in mainly in one respect, that it's not research in plutonium triggers for atomic bombs. It doesn't go into weaponry, but it does concentrate on nuclear research. So there is, in some respects, I suppose, a conundrum. Could there be benefits from nuclear? And that's a challenge, and that's why, again, we encourage young people to really look into nuclear studies. A professor, and I met an acquaintance he teaches at the University of Idaho, and he told me, he says, my students that are coming into the program, he teaches nuclear science, he says they don't understand, they don't have the vocabulary around nuclear. So definitely we need that. And so it's not only, I think, gaining more education around nuclearization, nuclearism, and nuclear power. The other thing that I heard this yesterday, and because I was encouraging Leona, why can't we get a declaration out of this gathering, this symposium, to actually do a declaration about nuclear. If it's anti-nuclear, that's great. The group I'm with, the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, we have a nuclear-free zone declaration, but it's only concentrated on the Grants Mining District. So that's another action step that I think that really can be taken. And the other one, the last thing that I'll talk about, is the need for collaboration. And I got jumped on all over by my own group at the last base meeting we had, because I was saying that we don't do enough collaboration. Even though, yeah, we are working with the Tularosa Downwinders in having amended RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. We're working together on it. And so that's one instance of collaboration. Yeah. So we've got to keep doing that. I think we know each other. We know CCNS, or we know the Los Alamos Study Group, but let's work together on really being anti-nuclear.
Yep.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, thank you, Batuch, for all the suggestions you just made. I think he made he addressed a good question that we can put out to the audience, which is, what can we do? And the last thing he said was collaboration. And I think we can do that. We're all here already, so let's make it happen. And so we'll move into the next speaker, who is Dave McCoy from Citizen Action, New Mexico.
Hi, glad to see you all. Just before Thanksgiving, I drove through Beatty, Nevada, on the way to Oregon. And we stopped, took the kids to a park, and I started talking to one of the park guys and said, hey, you had an explosion or a fire or something here, didn't you? He said, yeah, I got a good friend that took a video of it. I said, oh, really? What's his name? He said, it was Vern. Where's Vern live? Well, he's up here at Beatty Apartments. So I went up there. Well, Vern wasn't there, but the landlady was, and she said, yeah, I'll give your phone number to Vern. So Vern contacted me and sent me a picture that he took, and it looks like a mushroom cloud. It is a mushroom cloud. And, when that happened in October of 2015, back earlier than that, in February 15, we had been warning the New Mexico Environment Department that you could have an explosion from metallic sodium at the mixed waste landfill. The that's all been ignored and denied. But we know from the disposal sheets that there was metallic sodium and also high-level waste in the form of spent nuclear fuel rods placed in that dump. I counted at least 70. Now, the Environment Department and Sandia Labs is in great denial about any danger from this mixed waste landfill. I've been fighting that situation since 2006, and other people have been involved in it earlier than that. One of the things that's going to be happening in 2019 is that the Environment Department and Sandia are required to do a review for the excavation, the feasibility of excavation of the mixed waste landfill. And it's important for people right now to get involved in that. What's that old song? I'm going to sit right down and write myself a letter. Right? Okay. Well, sit right down and write yourself a letter to New Mexico Environment Department and demand that they begin disseminating information about the upcoming review and that they start having some meetings with the public about that review. Because I can guarantee you what is going to happen is that Sandia Labs is going to trot out all the lies in all the documents that they've filed over the last 10 years for all the hearings they've had to justify putting down a cover and leaving that waste in place. They're going to trot out all those documents and they're going to submit those and they're going to say, you see, there's no problem with the dump. And they're going to ask to basically just walk away from it, monitor it once in a while, but their monitoring system is defective, so that's not really a good program. In your letter, you need to demand that the Environment Department order Sandia Labs to provide a cleanup schedule for excavation and safe storage of the mixed waste landfill. And the Environment Department should require hearings to be held on what those cleanup plans are going to be so we can look at it. Now, they've argued for some time that, well, it's too dangerous to dig it up, but it's a safe dump the way it is. Well, let me tell you, the stuff that's in there will be around for millions of years. It's high-level waste, and that high-level waste comes from nuclear reactor meltdown experiments that were performed at Sandia Labs after the 3 Mile Island meltdown. And there were nuclear spent fuel that was used for that, those experiments from around the world, reactors around the world. So what's in that dump is extremely dangerous. It's generational in its danger. It's just like, you know, what you've got stored up at Lannel, and it needs to be safely handled, not left in place above an aquifer. There's a lengthy history of collusion between the Environment Department and Sandia Labs, and the EPA for that matter. There have been numerous documents that have been hidden, suppressed. One of the things that Citizen Action has been effective at is getting documents that they like to keep hidden from us. And I would suggest to all of you that you take free use of the Freedom of Information Act and the Public Records Request when you need to get information about things, because that's the only way you're going to get it. You have to pry it out of them. Citizen Action has been to court 3 times with federal agencies. We've been to court with the New Mexico Environment Department to get information. So it's an important thing to use. And it doesn't take much effort. And I've been, John Fleck from the Albuquerque Journal once referred to me as a serial FOIA offender. I filed hundreds of those things, and I filed them in Idaho too, and it's just amazing what you get back sometimes, you know, because agencies are sloppy. You think, oh, they think, you know, nobody's going to be interested in this, you know, but there it is, you know. One of the things that they did was they promoted Ron Curry to Region 6 EPA administrator in order to end any further discussion of problems at Sandia Labs. I found that pretty interesting. Then one of the things that's going on is this amendments to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. And of course, they're thinking about, well, let's bring it to New Mexico. You know, they don't know what they're doing down there. A bunch of ignorant, poor folk, you know. We've already managed to create a salt mine down there. And there's such a poor track record. You've got fires and explosions. You have release of all kinds of radiation up at Los Alamos. You've got all these. There's not a single Department of Energy facility in the United States that hasn't leaked nuclear waste into the environment. Not one. So when they talk about bringing waste here, you know there's going to be more accidents, and we're talking spent fuel. That stuff is really dangerous. How are they going to handle the spent fuel elements that are leaking? You know, you're not hearing any of the details about that, you know. There's an absence of siting criteria. The National Environmental Policy Act is being bypassed. This temporary storage that they're asking for is going to become permanent. This concept about consent of the community. What a crock of crap that is. You know? Community. Who's the community? Heaton? Pierce? A few people that want to get some extra bucks down in southern New Mexico, that's not the New Mexican community. When you talk about a community, it's got to be more than just a few people in a local town, you know, wanting more of the same poison. 1 minute. There's a conflict with the Land Withdrawal Act, and it's going to cut citizens out of the licensing process. You can bet on that. So my advice, bottom line, is the old saying out of the 60s, think global, act local. The most dangerous things going on are right around you, you know, take heed. Number one, mixed waste landfill and Sandia's activities in bomb building. Number two, the Kirtland Air Force Base jet fuel spill. It's a monster, and it's gonna affect us. And they're no further along in their planning for that accident remediation than they were 3 years ago when they were late in planning for it then. So I'm just throwing that in addition to the nuclear problem.
All right. Thank you, Dave. I think you hit up on a lot of points, mainly accountability from these institutions and how that lack of accountability physically harms us and it's physically violent to us. So on that note, we'll go with our last speaker, who you all are familiar with, Leona Morgan. She's awesome. She's part of many groups, and let's hear what she has to say.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, so I just wanted to respond to a couple of things that both Paduch and Dave here talked about, and something Karen mentioned the other day. So I know I'm going to try to put this all in 10 minutes. One of the things about the group, I was formerly a part of the MACE Coalition. I think you know, the idea of having coalitions and alliances and things like that is very important. But and this is something, it's not just that group. But a lot of groups I have been a part of were not doing what we're doing here in Nuclear Issues Study Group. There was a void. There was something lacking. And I often speak about this at national anti-nuke gatherings. So this conference is really walking the talk. I can't go somewhere and complain about their lack of inclusion or not having young people or people of color there. And so that's what we're doing here today. We're filling this void, and we feel it's needed. And I think it's very appropriate what we're doing had to be happening in New Mexico, in the belly of the beast. And so that's why we're here. And it was kind of funny when we were planning this conference, we were trying to organize, okay, what are we going to do this day, or what are we going to do that day? And okay, we want on Saturday, we're going to dismantle the nuclear beast. Well, how do we do that? Well, first we need to learn everything about it. We need to dissect the beast. We need to take it part by part so that we can study those parts, and then we can fight it. And then after we take it apart, then we're going to kill it. Then we're going to slay the beast. And so our thinking was, okay, we're going to dissect it, and then we're going to kill it. And I was explaining it to somebody, and they were like, wow, that's really brutal. You're going to dissect it while it's still alive. So you know, we're learning as we go. But I know normally you know, before you butcher a sheep, you have to kill it first. But no, I just wanted to share some of these stories because our group, we just started a year and a half ago. We just started planning this conference in June. We came up with the idea. We brainstormed it in June, and then we scrambled to get it going. So this is our first event. As an organization, I think this is our first event. Yeah, so thank you. Really appreciate it. So Dave talked about Beatty. I was driving to Reno, Nevada in October 2015. I had a meeting there, and a friend of mine, I'd said, okay, we're not going to fly because we wanted to visit a friend, John Redhouse. He lives near Reno, and he's a very important person in the indigenous movement. And so we got to Reno, and we were driving through Death Valley. We both get to the hotel, and we're just like, wow, it's really dry here. And then the rest of the time, we're like, man, the casino hotels are really smoky, and both of us were like, do you feel like you're getting sick? You know, both of us had these impacts to our bodies that were very apparent. And then I had all these emails, I saw all these things like warning alerts, but I was in the middle of a meeting, so I just, as I often do, I ignored a lot of my emails. And then I get home, and then I see there was this big radioactive release that I drove through, over and back. And that, I still have a little bit of PTSD every time, so I get kind of emotional. Because I don't know what's going to happen to me. We just drove through it, but what about the people who live there? What about the workers? All of those downwinders, what's going to happen to them in 20 to 25 years? And is there any accountability to that? Or is the government going to say, well, did you smoke? You know, those kinds of things. So, like I said, I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes. Karen brought up Tempe. The DOE was doing the consent-based siting. I'm really lucky I have a good friend in the room. I was in Washington, D.C. at a meeting, and I was like, I need to fly back to Albuquerque and then get in my car and drive to Phoenix because this meeting is happening, and it has to deal with New Mexico, but they're having it in Phoenix. So my good friend Diane Dorigo was like, well, we'll just get you the flight from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix, and then get a rental and drive home. So I was at this consent-based siting meeting, and I asked the DOE, well, who said we consent? Who said we want it in New Mexico? And they said, well, we got an application from WCS and Holtec. I asked them, was it the elected officials? Because they don't represent us. But then they said it was a company. Yeah, so this is their idea of consent-based siting. Okay, so we had an awesome presentation this morning from my relative, Clee Benali. And I'm very privileged and honored to work with Clee. He's my #1 supporter. So many times the work I've done has been invisibilized. I've dealt with people taking the credit, people not funding my work, heteropatriarchy, everything. And so this person has done so much to make sure that doesn't happen in Hall No. And so he's very, very special to me. And so it was very emotional, this whole gathering, because everything is, it's coming together. And I just want to thank Denise and everyone for their support, because it's been hard. It's been a hard 10 years. The first meeting I went to, when NDOM, first organization I worked for, they voted me into the board. The board said, okay, yeah, you can work for us. And I thought they were going to sign the contract to pay me and all of that. 6 months later, they said, oh, we don't owe you any money. We never signed the contract. But little did I know at the time, until I was at a meeting here in Albuquerque with Paul Robinson and some others. The meeting that they voted me in on occurred on July 16th, 2009. I had no clue. Didn't know nukes, like I said, we started the group on February 14th, 2014. So it's just incredible. I don't know if these are coincidences or what. But we're here now, and I have less than 5 minutes to finish my talk. I got 3 minutes, and so I wanted to run through some of these things that we got going on, some of these actions that we're going to do, some of these things that need to happen. And so we were visited by some of our relatives from Australia. They came to the Nuclear Issue Study Group meeting, and they want to work with us to organize this walkabout across the state of New Mexico. They do it every 5 years during the NPT negotiations, Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the UN thing. So I'm trying not to do the jargon thing, but everybody probably knows NPT. They used to walk across the United States all the way to New York. Now they don't. They're sick of New York, so they want to walk around New Mexico, and so we're going to take them from site to site, and we'd like you guys to get involved in that. We'd like you to walk with us. We'd like you to join us, to support us, to organize this. And what we're going to do also is we're going to work with Isleta. We're going to honor the work that Dave has done for 11 years, all these FOIA requests. We're going to use this work. We're going to put it out there. We're going to expose them. We're going to bird dog them, and more. We're going to stop them. We're going to make them clean up this mixed waste landfill. And and with Hall No, so I talked about 1872. So Forest Service says they will not deny permits. Arizona Department of Environmental Quality says they do not deny permits, that they regulate. And the regional office is right here downtown. So Nuclear Issue Study Group is talking about doing some stuff there. So get involved. We have another thing I'm going to talk about on the stream, but some peaceful, nonviolent actions to bring awareness to what is being allowed. And so that's one of the things we're proposing is a continuous vigil outside the Forest Service office. And then also we need to make some plans about this UN treaty. That's also on our docket. Last thing I want to mention again is we're planning a group of us called the Nuclear Heritage Network. We're working on this camp next summer in southern France. That's an excellent place to gather and network and work with people internationally. The other things that I wanted to mention is July 16th is an International Day of Action. Anyone can take that on. We all know what's going on with that. The Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium could use your support outside of the Trinity site. Church Rock, they have a march every year. August 6th and August 9th, these are also major days of International Days of Action. And there's all kinds of levels of action people can take individually, if you vote or not, whatever, you can do many things, write letters, get involved, educate yourself, groups, lawsuits, things like that. Maybe we'll move that direction, I'm not sure. But one of the strongest things that I think as indigenous peoples that we can do is specifically with Hall No, what's going on there is the regulations on transport of radioactive waste, radioactive materials. We have no control over it. The states have no control, the municipalities, the tribal governments. And so as the Navajo Nation has a law against radioactive transport, what happened is Trump sent a message to our president and said, you can make any laws you want, but we still have control over those roads and the railroads. So in order for our nation to stand up to the federal government, it has to break federal policy. and it's not willing to do that. And they've made that very clear to us. Our own tribal government has told us. So that's why we started Hall No, and then we found that out. But we need to take some serious action. If our own tribal government is not going to do it, it requires a lot more than just sitting through an awesome 1-hour presentation. But these are some of the things coming up, and these are some of the things that we should do, as well as what Batuch talked about, is getting this nuclear free zone declaration declared in Albuquerque, in Bernalillo County, and one day hopefully in the state of New Mexico. And so I'll end with that, and I have a lot more examples of some awesome actions I learned about in Europe that I'd like to share, but also if I don't have time to share them, I'll write them on the paper like everyone else can do. And we got these papers up on the wall that are places where we can input, and people, everybody, Karen, Kevin, Diane, if you guys have things going on, Joan and Marlene, we'd like to put them up there so people can get involved. And so this is a time now. We don't have time to organize at this conference, but we do have time to share and support and to take action. So thank you.
Thank you, Leona. So with that, we want to have your input and have your ideas that we started off with, like what can we do? And so we're going to do some progressive stack, POCs, women first, and then we'll get to the men. And so I think Diane has something important to say.
In the U.S. Congress, there's a bill, H.R. 3053. Dave McCoy mentioned it, the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendments Act of 2017. It would reignite the licensing process for Yucca Mountain, and I hope everyone here knows that Yucca Mountain is a very dangerous site and should not be considered anymore for high-level nuclear waste permanent dump. It's between active volcanoes and earthquake risk zones and connected to the water. And it was canceled by Obama and then Secretary of Energy. But now this bill, H.R. 3053, please write that down because you're going to be making a phone call and writing letters, H.R. 3053. And so it would reignite the licensing that was previously canceled for Yucca. It would legalize the kind of dump that they want to make here in Lee Eddy County, Holtec, and just across the state line at Waste Control Specialists. Those are the two places. It's illegal right now under the current law for supposedly interim centralized sites, and what this bill would do is to make that legal, and it would allow the high-level nuclear waste fund that was collected from the nuclear generators by our utility dollars. It would allow the money that's supposed to be for permanent dump to go to the companies that would run the supposedly interim dump. So the bill would re-threaten Yucca. It would legalize these supposedly interim dumps, which we are dubbing parking lot dumps, because it's just putting it on a pad in a parking lot, or the one here in New Mexico would be shallow holes in the ground. Okay, and it would, so anyway, the bill is bad. It would trigger tens of thousands of shipments from 30 to 40 years, roads, rails, waterways, all threatened. And the House has the bill right now, but if it passes the House, it could go to the Senate. And Senator Udall from your state is a very likely person to help stop it, even though the Democrats are not in power. So it is important for New Mexicans to demand of your senators and your representatives that they stand strong and fight this bill. And we around the rest of the country will do everything we can to mobilize to support their leadership. But we don't have champions right now speaking out against these things, and we need them. And so anyway, that's what an action step is.
All right, thank you, Diane. Yeah.
Kevin can follow up on that. He and I are your DC people who are trying to fight it in DC.
Eileen. Yeah. Let's hear from a woman first.
Hi. Actually, I have a quick question for Dave. The mention of Beatty, which was a low-level radioactive waste dump, folks. Remember that. It wasn't even it wasn't high level. It was a low-level radioactive waste dump. That low level, that waste is what exploded. I have a question about the mixed waste dump. Was that dump required to have a liner?
The waste is here, the water's there, and the only liner is a dirt cover above the waste. There is no liner. And what's interesting in there was a hearing a year or so ago about corrective measures complete for the mixed waste landfill. And in that, they said that, well, it wasn't a RCRA cover, and so it really is not the most effective cover for that type of dump. So this is a real opening, in a way, for us to argue that you don't have a liner underneath. It never was properly designed as a landfill. It's called a mixed waste landfill, but a landfill has very specific requirements for.
Yes, my family owned a landfill for 25 years. One of the reasons that got me involved in Ward Valley was realizing that none of the laws and rules that applied to your coffee grounds and diapers applied to low-level waste.
Well, the whole business with low-level waste is kind of a misnomer in the first place. I mean, there was lots of plutonium in that beady dump.
Are you going to say your line, Sue?
Okay. So Sue, and then we'll give it over to Kevin.
Just to say that we learned from this experience that food trucks are more regulated than the mixed waste landfill in this city.
So I just had a addition to what Diane said, and Joni Aaron's asked me to announce this anyway. In addition to all those individual actions people can take on HR 3053, there are 2 group sign-on letters that are for organizations. One has been initiated by Sierra Club and NRDC. Thankfully, they took that on, and it's last I knew it was 120 groups on there. It was sent on October 11th, but they're going to send it one more time as the bill is moving to the House floor. So if your groups are not on there yet, please talk to me. We can email you the letter so you can see what it says. But we need to really boost that number big time. And the second group sign-on letter, I'm from Michigan, and I'm on the board for West Michigan, and we have a Great Lakes specific letter because there's a lot of impacts on the Great Lakes from this proposal. Diane mentioned barge shipments, so there's barge shipments on Lake Michigan proposed. There's a lot of road and rail routes that are within the basin if there was an accident and it spilled, it could go into the lakes that way. So it's focused on the Great Lakes, but we're welcoming groups all over the country, all over the continent, U.S., Canadian, First Nations, Native American groups, because the Great Lakes are a world treasure, irreplaceable, sacred drinking water for 40 million people this generation, and then all future generations just keep adding on. So we would welcome groups to sign on to both of these letters. To Roswell. Next Saturday in Roswell, there's going to be a meeting about the centralized pickup storage facilities proposed in southeastern Mexico and West Texas. And there's a flyer out on the table with more information.
I want to add to this real quick. Is anyone from Nuclear Issues Study Group able to carpool, folks? Okay, so we got a big 10-passenger van, or 12? Okay, so so talk to us if you guys want to go. And just to respond to what Kevin said, we had a meeting. There's meetings going on nationally about these things. And at one of these meetings, there's a email, Don't Waste Texas, right? And then we took on the Gmail, Don't Waste New Mexico. So anybody can take on this email for their state. Don't waste Navajo Nation. Don't waste Arizona, So these will be used to send out information to our groups. Cody and I are administrators on that email. We need to use it more, but I invite you all to also use the email for your particular community.
Hi, I'm Denise, and my husband Paul and I just stumbled into this panel. We were literally just taking a walk and saw the sign outside, and and it's kind of curious because I know my husband did your master's thesis, something to do with nuclear energy, but anyway, I'm really shocked to hear about what's going on in my backyard. We're new to New Mexico. We just moved here from New England last May, and I became familiar with the oil spill to which you mentioned, Mr. McCoy, and because we live literally just a few blocks away. And it's very disconcerting because it seems as though that the Air Force is not in any way having any kind of transparency regarding it. And I'm very concerned about my drinking water. But from what I'm hearing here, now I'm like in a bit of an alarmed state. And I'm more concerned about why I'm not hearing about this in mainstream media or even local media. And I'm wondering what kind of social networking or how you guys are getting the message out to the general population. I know that in the mid-'80s there was a lot of clamor about nuclear energy and nuclear waste. You don't hear that now. Of course, we have a big distraction back in Washington with the clown car. That's Trump. So how are you guys planning on getting the message out?
Well, there is alternative. There is alternative media that, but the difficult thing with respect to what you might label mainstream media here is with respect to Kirtland, you've got the Kirtland Partnership Association. And this consists of a lot of the people that control the media and businesses, the Chamber of Commerce and that kind of thing, and they don't want us talking about these problems or having people like yourselves get acquainted with these kind of problems, Somehow all of this is going to be collected by aliens in Roswell and shipped off next weekend,
So, the ABC is owned by Disney. CBS is, like the eye in the sky. Even their emblem is this, Big Brother symbol. It's not going to be heard in mainstream media. We sent our team, our outreach committee sent press releases and called all of the local TV stations. So mainstream media blackout. So I don't, why Dave explained exactly why. This who's controlling the media, and it has a lot to do with money and who's controlling them. We, appreciate any help with we have available media here. We have the radio station 90.1 from Taos. They came, so we have alternative media, and I think the way I learned about these things is word of mouth, getting involved. So if you guys have any ideas, if anyone wants to head the committee, please do. Thanks, Mariah.
Sorry, so I get the same emails like 4 times, which is not, there's nothing wrong with that. But there are some of us who are not on Facebook, right? And so, often I think folks rely too much on Facebook. Like, I'm not on Facebook. So just thinking about ways to collaborate in terms of media, that might be a great place to start.
Actually, can actually I need to yeah, I need to interrupt here. Sue, can you write the individual letters? The whatever Karen was just saying. There's we need to send out the template for the personal letters. Okay, I'm sorry. So the other thing I wanted to add, along with this, we're talking about waste transport, and for Navajo Nation, I mentioned the Hall No stuff, the uranium waste. When I talked to them about Hall No's issue with the Canyon Mine uranium ore going to the White Mesa Mill, they basically said it's out of our jurisdiction, it's out of our hands. So I said, well, what about the CIS proposals? What about waste coming from all over the country? If it's going to New Mexico, it's going to go along I-40 or the railroads going down to southeast New Mexico. If it's going to Yucca, it's going to go through the res that way. So we're screwed either direction. Anyways, we, as Hall know, we have a lot of support from the city of Flagstaff. The city of Flagstaff wants to stop the transport, and the city council asked their lawyer to look into this. And the lawyer came back at the next meeting and said, we can't do it, we're superseded. And I'm learning a lot about these things. I should have known these things sooner, that, so we can't, the smaller governments can't control what goes on the federal highways. And so what Roswell actually made city ordinances to put to limit what type of radioactive waste goes through. Maybe they couldn't stop it, but what they did was they made curfews, they changed all kinds of things, and the DOE, they didn't want to deal with the city of Roswell, they didn't want to sue them, so they just went along, they just took all those recommendations and they abided by them. So we as people can do this in the city of Albuquerque, we can do this in the city of Flagstaff. Not just a resolution, but an ordinance and I know my comrade Clee would say, but we don't, so the city of Flagstaff said, well, if we can't stop them, maybe we can put something stronger than a tarp over the uranium. Maybe we can make them hold them in more contained casings. So that discussion started, and someone like Clee would say, no, we want them to stop it. But these are other fights that we can also do. We can demand that they have the 20-inch or thicker casks. You know, these kinds of things are what we need to do as a study group to figure out what we need to do. And then I just want to echo Clee's challenge to us as a study group that maybe we have a nuclear issues action group. So yeah, so we got some stuff on the wall, and I just wanted to add those two things, so thank you.
Okay. It's on now. Okay, so in addition to first in-person opportunity next Saturday in Roswell and the National Summit on Waste in Chicago, May 17th, we are less than 3 years away from the 75th anniversary of everything starting, whether it's the Trinity test site, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. I'm meeting with some people this week while I'm in New Mexico to talk about what should that look like. How do we commemorate that 75th anniversary? While we'd like to think we've ended nuclear colonialism by the year 2020, more likely we can make it a presidential conversation in the next presidential election. And we need to be thinking about that.
All right, thank you.
So good afternoon, I'm Joni Ahrens. I'm with Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety. I was going to say we've been broadcasting a CCNS news update for 30 years. And so if you all have action alerts, if you have sample comment letters, please email them to ccns@nuclearactive.org. And I'm happy to put those up on in our broadcasts and our social media. That's number one. Number two, if you haven't filled out one of these postcards to Senator Grassley about amendments to RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, please fill it out. They're right here. Number three, Kevin's letter. These national letters. I think, like right now, it's, SHRIC, CCNS, CARD, SHRIC sometimes signs on these national letters. I'm wondering if folks would be supportive of me sending around a piece of paper that says CCNS, or excuse me, New Mexico groups that would want to be part of the email lists for the national groups to email us. Because I think that these national letters would have more effect because they inevitably they get to the congressional delegation, and more groups signing on would be more powerful in the long term, especially on all of these issues that are coming up.
Thanks, Joni. And I think with our MailChimp news thing, our email lists, we need to start to send those out too, because we do get them. We are on the list. We just haven't gotten that savvy. Real quick, Joni, when does your update broadcast on KUNM?
Saturday night at 6:30 or 7, and we're hoping that Robin's station will pick it up. It's being broadcast in Boulder at this point. When we first started, we had 22 radio stations around the state, and slowly DOE eroded the sponsorship by these small radio stations in small towns, and we're in the process of trying to rebuild that.
Thank you, Joni. So we're going to have one more last comment from the gentleman across the room, just so we can end on time.
Hi, I'm Smitty, and I wanted to pick up on why the resolutions on transportation are so important and how it rolls into the battle over H.R. 3053. There is a lot of questions about whether or not the resolutions can be effective blocking anything actually coming through a community. As Leona and Clee and others have said, maybe there are conditions we can put on like Roswell did that make it really difficult. But it isn't so much what ends up happening, it's the fact that we're having a debate about the danger of 10,000 shipments of this waste coming through our communities, headed down to the area in between Cobb's and being put in that location down there.
That was good. Is it working now? And so if we get these resolutions scheduled for debate in Albuquerque and city after city after city throughout New Mexico, then suddenly we're putting pressure on your congressional delegation where all this is coming to stand up and have some guts to protect the people from those 10,000 shipments of waste, each of which contains as much plutonium as the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. This isn't child's play. This is massive death if one of these things happen, and a 42 square mile contamination, even with a minor leak. One of the people who is most difficult and a proponent of this is now running for governor. This sets up that campaign, and that makes him a person responsible for bringing in this kind of death and destruction to New Mexico. It's an opportunity we all have to be able to mobilize the people who have not yet engaged in a campaign in their communities that can be won, that can really make the issue of nuclear contamination and why we brought it on ourselves into the forefront, and an opportunity for people in city after city to say, no nukes, no more waste. We're done with this stuff in New Mexico. That's what we can do with this resolution and this piece of legislation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Smitty. That was a great ending to the comments. So now we're just going to take last comments from all of the presenters, and then after that, we're going to give them a big round of applause. All right.
Yeah, two things. Yeah, just to buttress the statement that was just made about passing resolutions at the county levels, at the city levels, and at the tribal levels. So that, you may not prevent it, but you're getting the citizen outrage at this actions happening. So definitely encouraging our governmental entities to pass these resolutions. And the second thing, of course, is the politics behind this. You know, Senator Udall, he's a great friend, personal acquaintance and environmentalist, but yet, he'll support something like the Defense Authorization Act. So where you've got this billions of dollars going into the national laboratories, he's a fan of that. So they also need to be put on the carpet for their own stances on these issues.
with respect to the transportation of waste, I think it's important to look at the larger picture, which is they don't have any place to put the waste. The nuclear reactors around the country are backing up. This whole thing is about continuation of nuclear power in a much larger sense. You know, the military's over here, but nuclear power generation, this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry worldwide. And so your goal really is to shut that down. That's what I've been trying to work for ever since I was in my 20s, was the idea that if we could just get nuclear power off the table, and the folks that are trying to do solar and wind power would get their act together soon enough, you know, we could get away from nuclear power and all the waste and all the problems.
Thanks, Dave. Maybe we need to write that down to work closer together with folks supporting renewables. We need the yes fight. I'm sick of this no fight. We need a yes fight as well. So I want to end with a couple of examples of actions that are more probably what the Nuclear Issues Study Group kind of wanted to take on. All of these things in the room are going on, and this is exactly what I was hoping would come out of this session. And I'm really happy we have all these great people in the room. But some of the things I learned on my travels in Germany, they just do some amazing actions. They did one that was making a human chain that was like 90 miles long from Aachen to Tihange, or I'm sorry, my pronunciation's horrible, but it was from, one facility to another facility, and it was just, people uniting and supporting, and maybe, these things are things that we can attempt to do here in New Mexico. We have so many sites that we can put together, maybe during our walkabout. The other thing is, one of the actions they did was they did a lockdown. There was a radioactive waste transport, or anyways, radioactive materials transport along the railroads, and these folks, they locked down under the railroad. They did the lock boxes, so you guys all saw the presentation. Clee had a lock box here. They locked down under a railroad, and the cops could not stop them. The police had no idea how to take them away, to move them, to arrest them, so they ended up cutting the railroad. We got a lot of railways here, but anyways, they're just ideas. And some of the more simple things that we could do is, like Patuch said, we can come up with collaborative statements. So I'm going to read this statement that some of us came up with in April last year, and this is our no consent statement. So, we do not consent to the consolidated storage of high-level radioactive waste, which is often targeting economically vulnerable communities whose voices go unheard. We oppose the transport of high-level radioactive waste on highways, railways, and waterways. So maybe our group here can sign on to this statement, as well as the letters, and to support all of the work that's going on in the country. Thank you.
All right, let's give these guys a round of applause, everybody. So thank you for attending our last panel. If you guys have any more suggestions or how we can collaborate together and stand together in solidarity, Sue's over there with marker, and we also want the sign-up sheet with your name, email, and action, issuer action.
And that's for the contact person, right? The contact person for the, okay.
Exactly. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
So we have student presentations next. So we're going to take a short break, and then we'll have the students come back in for their final projects. Thank you.
Awesome.
Nuclear New Mexico. So you're going to be hearing about what the students have been up to all semester long. They've put together different projects that are addressing different aspects of these social justice and environmental justice issues. So all weekend long, we've been talking about a lot. You just heard a panel mention the mixed waste landfill, which is a dump that is very close to where we're sitting here today. It's located on Sandia's property. It's threatening our groundwater. It could potentially explode. We've talked about that this semester. We've talked a lot about environmental racism and how these issues disproportionately impact people of color and poor folks. And we've gone on a lot of field trips this semester as well. We went to Los Alamos, to the Jack Powell mine on Laguna Pueblo. Some folks went down to Trinity, to the Trinity site. And yeah, and so all semester long, these students have been wrestling with these issues, and they are the next generation. They're the ones who are coming up behind us and who are going to be facing these issues whether they like it or not. And so we're very excited to see what they've come up with. And this is their final. We're all a part of it together. It's great. No pressure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an answer to Patucha's call for collaboration, for intergenerational collaboration. And really, that's what we're here to do this weekend. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first student. And Brendan, can we cue up the video? Haley Brown, come on up.
Hello, everybody. So this is a short video I made. It's pretty self-explanatory, and I'd be happy to answer any questions afterwards. As a high school debater, I spend a lot of my time talking about the inevitable nature of nuclear detonation. My junior year of high school, I was selected to compete in a semifinal round of the International Public Policy Forum in New York City. The topic of the debate was, as a last resort, unilateral military force is justified to minimize nuclear weapons proliferation. That is me in the middle, wearing a lapel pin of Fat Man, bomb dropped on Nagasaki. We had all visited the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History and picked up those pins in preparation for the trip. It wasn't until I studied abroad in Ghana almost a year later that I really started to think about how my educational experiences had informed my nuclear worldview. While I was in Ghana, I worked at a primary school. One morning, the teacher I worked under asked me to grade a specific part of the students' English textbooks. It was a sentence ordering exercise about the different steps on boarding a train. The teacher had never ridden a train before and didn't know what the correct order of the sentences was, and because of that, I was left to grade the workbook. While I was grading the workbooks, I couldn't help but think how baffling it was that the educational materials at this school were so irrelevant to the lived experiences of the students that went there. Their narrative was ignored. I started questioning the ways in which we learn about nuclear history and how the framing of this industry has impacted the perspective New Mexicans have on its existence in our state. How are we learning about nuclear history in school? To begin my investigation, I headed to the place where the atomic industry had made one of its first marks on our state, the Trinity site. And I asked people what they remembered learning about the Trinity test in school.
I feel like I learned something about it, but I couldn't tell you. I think I learned that it was the site of the original atomic explosion.
Yeah.
For the Manhattan Project.
Can you repeat what you said earlier?
Yeah, I didn't even hear about it until you guys told me.
Really?
Yeah.
When I don't know how How did I learn of this? It was later in life.
Yeah.
And
From our kids.
yeah, from our kids.
From your
Yeah.
kids.
Otherwise, it was something that was never taught in school.
While going to Trinity gave me a glimpse of what I was looking for, I was eager to hear more about how my peers that went to high school in New Mexico had learned about the nuclear weapons industry and how they perceived that experience.
So I'm from Edgewood, New Mexico, and I went to high school in both Moriarty High School and Moreno Valley High School.
I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I went to high school at the Albuquerque Institute for Mathematics and Science.
I'm originally from Mexico. I lived in Albuquerque since 2009, and I went to El Dorado High School.
I'm born and raised in Albuquerque, and I went to St. Pius High School.
So I was raised for the better part of my life in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is in southern New Mexico, about 3 hours away from Albuquerque.
Nothing.
Honestly, I don't remember learning anything.
Not very much of it. I think the only thing I really remember is like learning about like the nuclear bomb in history class, but that was junior year, so that was a long time ago.
I'm pretty sure I'm the wrong person to interview for this.
No, I want your authentic
Are
answers.
you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't learn much about nuclear, the nuclear industry, through my classes in school. It wasn't really part of the narrative. It really wasn't part of the educational curriculum that was presented. I think I remember in my New Mexico history class, I think talk a little bit about the Manhattan Project and how New Mexico was directly involved in that, and it was definitely framed as kind of we played this really important role in ending the Second World War, and that was the narrative that was presented, but.
Mostly the raw history behind it, at least in the context of history, just why we had to make the bomb, and it was to prevent, the loss of several millions more lives. And in the context of science, we learned that how much of a achievement it was to actually construct the bomb, and how it was like this kind of pinnacle of mankind.
Like a majority of my New Mexico history class was like centered around World War II. But what's weird about our New Mexico history class is there's only a semester.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's how everybody else's was, but ours was only 16 weeks, and then that was it. So like a lot of it, like I said, it was mainly like a little bit before like the Conquistador era, and then World War II, and then like I think probably like a week of like current day.
We didn't learn much about the arms race or nuclear weapons in general that I can remember. I do remember we had a project where I chose to go to the Nuclear Science Museum, and that's where, like, inside of that class and outside of that class, I learned the most about nuclear history.
Definitely, it was like a story based on the perspective of us and how we, U.S. in the context of the world, and how we came along and saved everyone. Not only that, but we weren't asked to question what we did was right or wrong. We were just told that we had to do it. We weren't asked if it was, we weren't asked to inquire about, would have really 1 million more people died during the war if we didn't drop the bomb, or would have had the Japanese surrender sooner.
Well, it is interesting because I read this and I see, okay, well, this content standard of in order to understand the complexity of the human experience, and I see several narratives on this sheet that we're definitely taught as very incomplete and weren't the full picture growing up in the schools. Everyone else, I suppose. They were necessarily left out, but their roles were minimized, or maybe not even emphasized at all.
Natives of New Mexico, minority groups, who is being inflicted on by this type of energy, what is actually being. I don't think we ever talked about waste either. We never talked about anything that involves the after aspects of what we used it for, only what was like current and what needed to be done to do it, but never what happened to it afterwards.
Definitely people who didn't participate in that. Like, I can only imagine, like, people in Los Alamos who weren't, like, in the bomb efforts, or people who were there beforehand, and then, like, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of the untold stories, I feel like no one really questions it or narrates it or cares to, because it's just, like, bomb, and that's our big contribution.
It's kind of like what we kind of perceive as being reality, it was actually reality, right? So for example, right? Yeah, sure, on the surface level, like these high-tech industries and the role of science in New Mexico is ostensibly a good thing, right? It builds jobs, builds the economy, but really it's also in essence create kind of a colony of sorts of Hispanic people that surround the Santa Fe and Los Alamos areas, right? And so that is something they don't teach you in the classroom. And that is a narrative that we kind of ignore here in the state of New Mexico. And so, if we're talking about the complexity of the human experience, how can you not acknowledge these and still, I guess, essentially say that we're understanding the complexity?
What does it mean when those that grew up in the place where the nuclear weapons industry was born feel as though their educational understandings of this industry are fragmented? How do we make sense of our educational experiences as New Mexicans when our narratives are not represented? Cognitive justice is recognizing the diversity of knowledge, understanding, and of narratives. It is the presence of equality for all knowers. When will New Mexico see cognitive justice in the nuclear story?
In a very ironic turn of events, while I've been waiting to get into Trinity, the Ring of Fire started playing on the radio.
I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire. I fell into...
All right. We're gonna do a Q&A, questions and comments at the very end with everybody. So one more round of applause for Haley. And next up is Lozen Benson.
I've used a microphone before. Wait, oh God. I don't like it.
Hold it like this directly.
Okay. So my project is called From Theoretical to Literal: Transformation of Wasteland Ideologies to Desperate Realities in Nuclearism. So what I did for my project is I did a literary analysis of Laura Nader and Hugh Gusterson's Nuclear Legacies. There's 4 principles of nuclearism. And I brought in like a secondary text to evaluate each of those, and they're nuclear colonialism, secrecy, othering, and mass numbing. And they're what create the system and sustain it. Next. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, next though. So nuclear colonialism, I used a piece by Tracy Voiles, and she describes nuclear colonialism as the process of removing people from a landscape, which is done through conceptualizing the landscape as lesser and the bodies within it as justifully exploitable. This has been seen and materialized through uranium mining and milling in indigenous communities, where people weren't really told that uranium was radioactive and that they could get cancers and birth defects and infertility. So uranium mining and milling is a form of genocide, and it's a system which is only productive or even like reasonably, it just like benefits a very exclusive group of people and doesn't have any regard for the bodies and the people of specific lands that are deemed like exploitable. So next. And so I kind of argue that it's like a system that perpetuates itself. So wastelanding is like a conceptual basis for like saying this land is undesirable and the people within it aren't like worthy, so it's racism and environmental racism, which then justifies the like active colonization through like employing people in these like uranium mines and mills, which then makes like the land uninhabitable and radioactive, and then the people unhealthy, which like materializes the initial concept of the land and the bodies as like not worthy, which then like re-perpetuates with which I think we see through like uranium mining, and then the land becomes like lesser, and then like now we want to put WIP here too, so we want to like just perpetuate and like bring more nuclear waste and like bad things to New Mexico. So secrecy is the second. Somebody was talking earlier about how like, well, why isn't this in the predominant narrative? Like, why aren't we like learning about this in the news? Sorry. Why aren't we learning about everything about nuclearism in the news, because it directly impacts us? You can't hear me. Oh, I'll slow down. I'm sorry. So there's 23 million classifications of records a year, and 9.9 billion dollars of government spending going towards classification of documents. 50% of the information that's classified doesn't need to be classified. It's like a really bizarre relationship between people and the government and accountability with these issues. And in terms of nuclearism, it's under the guise of like safekeeping, which is very peculiar, because when you think about the fact that we're bombing, or I guess there haven't been above ground testings, but bombing our own land and like exploiting and ruining our own land so that other people don't is really like a strange concept. Next. Please, thank you. So there's restricted access just in terms of what information people are getting and what information you're not getting. And then information is coded, and you see that even in like your pamphlets, there's all of those acronyms. So it's like, even if you have these documents, what kind are you able to interpret what you're saying? Like, not really. And then media will introduce things to dismiss them or undermine the source. Thank you. Yeah, and so like I was saying, it's like a very strange relationship between, if information is hidden, then one, the government is unaccountable to the public, and two, people don't have, if you know things and you're not actively doing something to like revolt against it, then you're passively consenting to it. So it's like a weird relationship of like, we have to be brave enough to know these things. Othering is the process of like dehumanizing people. I used Eileen Shaughnessy's work for this, and we like whitewashed history because the predominant narrative is told by the colonizer, not the colonized. And then we've restructured the future as a white space in terms of science being the thing that like guides us through history, and that's like epistemically accessible to only a few group of people. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so progress, science is like leading us, but it's undermining a lot of the like meditative and like actually people as like not mechanisms, and it's like undermining that, which is environmental racism, and is again related to nuclear colonialism. Mass numbing, so that was the fourth and last mechanism of nuclear colonialism. So it's, like being disconnected from the people who are being impacted by these things. There are 3 active response categories. I used a psychology journal for this, by the way, so that's where that information is coming from. So reconstruction of own behavior or the incident, I think we see that through the justification of bombing Japan. And yeah, like it ended a world war, but in reality it didn't, but that's like the moral justification for that. And then reconstruction of own role in incident, I think we see through like Los Alamos and people like compartmentalizing their jobs. And like, oh, I only work with fission, or I only do this or that, which like discombobulates them from responsibility. Reconstruction of the parties involved, that's othering. And then the argument for nuclearism has been that it was like bombing Japan was bad, but it has like kept us out of war for a long time because mutually assured destruction, MAD, and so it like is justified in that it has been overall a good thing. Thank you. Then that's just not true though. The war was gonna end anyways. And also it's really weird to be like, well, we're suffering now from the things that are producing nuclearism, like from land and like oppression. And so it's weird to think that the suffering we're doing now is like helping us now and in the present. So it's interesting. It's also utilitarianism, which is a form of ethics that values utility over anything else. So this is like the typical utilitarian thought experiment, and it's like, do you pull this and like redirect the train to kill the one person, or passively allow like 5 people to die? And so, yeah, it's like a very interesting moral like question, and it's like wrong. Also, it has justified a lot of weird things. So my conclusion is just that like science isn't going to save us, and that we need like a new perspective, and I think that we need to be like vulnerable and acknowledge truths that maybe aren't easy, and we need a new cycle. And all knowledge is situated knowledge, so science has to be more like inclusive and not just like a numerical value system that has resulted in a lot of weird things. And then sources. That is my next. Thank you.
All right. Next we have Jana Garfield.
So my project was women and the biological impacts of nuclearism. And there is a slight watermark on some of the slides. Just overlook that. Yeah, sure. Actually, wait a second, sorry. So the feminist and ecological movements are closely tied in that the mindset that is feeding the environmental degradation and human injustice is similar, if not the same, that is caused by exploitation, the value of the male role, and the inequality for the female gender. Historically, the rhetoric of science is male-dominated and devalues female intellectual contributions. Often women are subjugated as sex symbols, incubators, and marginalized into doing some simple household tasks. We can compare the historical nuclear movements and the physicality of women in that they are both desired, exploited, and under-discussed. No problem. Go ahead. So this is a time-lapse of the portraits that I did regarding the women that I focused on that were biologically affected by nuclearism. The first portrait that you will see me working on is of Nisan Lucan from Rongelap, who was affected by the Castle Bravo blast in 1946. That stood at 15 megatons and was being the largest tested in the thermonuclear device, being tested as the largest thermonuclear device. This vaporized the futures and surrounding environment of the Marshall Islands. The signs of radiation exposures were evident in that the 3 days following the blast, plants were wrinkled and died. People were so unaware that the white fallout powder was dangerously radioactive that they freely let children play in the substance like it was snow. It coated the ground, trees, water supplies, and human bodies. Within hours, sickness set in, such as vomiting, diarrhea, and visible burns. After people returned to the atoll in 1957, they were unknowingly used as human experiments in Project 4.1, which was a secret study by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, which focused on the human interaction on the heavily contaminated land. Lucan was only 4 years old when her family returned to the atoll and remembers people getting blisters on their feet from walking on the sand and in their mouths from eating the native foods. Women had the most common birth defects. They explained it as jellyfish babies. These babies were born with no bones in their bodies and with transparent skin like grapes. She said, and this is a quote, that many women die from abnormal pregnancies, and those survived give birth to what people look like giant purple grapes, which we quickly hide and bury. The second portrait you will see me focusing on is of a Japanese woman by the name of Setsudo Kura. She was a member of the Fukushima Women Against Nukes. Setsudo was born in the Iwaki city of Fukushima, Japan. And after the accident, everyone evacuated from there, which she and many people returned to the Kuriyama city in Fukushima. She immediately saw the state of cleanup, cover-ups, and untruths. She helped organize the many nonviolent protests, and she says, "Our movement is conservative, and I mean in the way that activism is old, in my opinion. The movement requires women's intuitiveness, carefulness, and composed sense." She then shares what is an invisible pressure and an oppressive atmosphere imposed on the freedom of speech. We hardly say that there's a very dangerous situation or that it's okay for children to be evacuated. They don't really discuss it there in Japan. And for people like her who speak out, it is in the overwhelming minority. The aftermath of Fukushima accident, Japan has declared a state of denuclearization, but regarding with the Fukushima issue, many residents are concerned with the legislation and action regarding the children's evacuation. However, actually, Fukushima seems to be supposed by the skillful manipulation that was discussed by Lozin in the aspects of nuclearism. Forcing the dilution of the biological issues through money and political titles, along with power in small and regional communities. She closes with the reminder that the movement requires women's biological compassion. And so the last one, which you have already seen, was my self-portrait. I was born in Tula, Russia, which was a land that was directly impacted from the downwind of the Chernobyl 1986 disaster. This was unique in the event which was the first event in history of a commercial nuclear power incident where radiation was directly related to documented deaths. And this was about 30 workers and a few firefighters that were immediately affected in the 3 months after. It was a direct consequence of the Cold War isolation and that resulted in a lack of safety culture, which then released economic disruption for large populations of Belarus, Russia, and the Ukraine. Mental health coupled with smoking, alcohol abuse is very much a greater problem than the irradiation. But worst of all time was the underlying level of health and nutrition. In my self-portraits, in my portraits, you can see that the woman from Ronjlat was looking to the left, I was looking to the right, and the woman from Fukushima was looking down the middle. We are also all in water, which is the basis of all life. And that is basically the medium connecting all of our physical locations. We are looking into the different directions of the future of our nuclear future and hopefully our anti-nuclear future as well. Thank you.
Brennan, it's the Three Peoples. Three Peoples. I think it's Natasha B. Yeah. Okay, all right. So next up we have a group of students from the Sustainability 334 class. Jordan Anderson, who is here, Trenton Ward, Natasha Panetta, and George Davis.
All right, so our project was addressing environmental racism in art, and we decided to specifically address New Mexico's tricultural myth and the Three Peoples mural in Zimmerman Library, which is here on campus. Next. Just give you some time to read this. Oh, sorry. There's a reason for the familiar ring of what we call the status quo. What exists now is comfortable and known, and to some degree, it works. It makes sense. At some point, the attitude, the policy, or the practice made sense to adopt, at least for some person or institution. So changing it to something new requires a considerable shift. When you try and change an opinion or policy, what do you utilize? Communication. And that's why we're all here today. So what did we do? In such a delicate and crucial time in our country, we decided that we needed to combat the apathy that exists today. Many memorials and murals essentially celebrate the subjugation and genocide of indigenous people and glorify the conquerors. We proposed that the controversial Three Peoples mural located in Zimmerman Library be addressed. The mural depicts the Anglo man as being the most powerful. It proposes a problem on the campus because many students that are from indigenous or Latino backgrounds have to walk by this mural daily. Additionally, the mural supports the tricultural myth that states that only white, indigenous, and Latino cultures have been placed in New Mexico. While these cultures may be our most dominant, they are completely disregarding the other members of our community, such as members from Asian or African descent. We set out to collect all the information we could currently being done on the mural to respect all the work that has been done so far. This led us to create a space for our community members to engage in an intimate discussion, and we held this in the Willowed Room, which is the glass room right next to the mural itself. And our community created a powerful conversation concerning one of the most taboo topics of our time, the existence of racism. So our first guest speaker was Noel Marquez. This is one of his murals. He is a native New Mexican who's been working on murals for quite some time, and a lot of his work speaks to the environmental injustices that exist in New Mexico.
This is our second speaker, Mr. Alex Lubin, who is a professor of American Studies and assistant provost. He's also teaches at the University of Beirut. He's also an activist and served as director of the Center for American Studies and Research at the American University of Beirut. Alex is published academic scholar in various journals and offered classes next semester about what should be done with the mural and working towards making conversations and actions. As he has been involved with the mural's work for quite some time, we thought it was vital to bring him on board.
All right, so environmental justice. It is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. There are 17 principles of environmental justice. And we'll go to the next slide. We also decided to address environmental racism, which describes the fact that people of color and low-income people are most likely to be situated near sources of contamination and away from clean water, air, and soil. Settler colonialism is a distinct type of colonialism that functions through the replacement of indigenous populations with an invasive settler society that over time develops a distinctive identity and sovereignty. And unfortunately, us in New Mexico are no strangers to environmental injustices, racism, or settler colonialism. It is powerful for us to come together and address these issues. Without further ado, let's look at some of the racist elements portrayed through art and in the UNM and New Mexican communities.
So here we have some statues of conquistadors, which in my opinion are very similar and comparable to the Confederate statues that have been causing so many problems throughout our country. They're reminders of a terrible and genocidal past. We have Don Diego de Vargas on the upper left and Don Juan de Oñate on the upper right. And I mean, look, we have buildings that are named after these people on UNM campus. You know, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. There's an obelisk at Santa Fe Plaza that reads, "To the heroes who've fallen in the battle with savages throughout the territory of New Mexico." Savage Indians, excuse me, and the word savage was crossed out and someone put in courageous, which I thought was pretty cool. And yeah, I thought this was a good sign. We should celebrate resistance, not conquest, you know. Another shining example of how improperly we name our sacred buildings, like our mall is named after, well, for Americans, malls are pretty sacred. But yeah, another conquistador and murderer of indigenous peoples, you know, his name is put on our mall. It makes no sense to me. And I remember I grew up in Taos, and my dad refused to take me to Kit Carson Park because of all the, I mean, look, he was America's greatest Indian fighter, you know? It's like, so we give him a park? Like, makes no sense. And then just some more examples of UNM questionable iconography. Conquistadors on either side, and you know, it is basically saying what Indians, you know. I mean, that was the seal that was on our diplomas up until a couple years ago. Thank God we were able to get rid of that, which I think is excellent and a start in the right direction. And we believe that this Three Peoples mural should be relocated, and I found what I thought was a great place to relocate it, the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia and Art. And this is actually on a Michigan State university, so they've actually put it in their own university, so I believe maybe it's time that UNM creates something of a similar venue. Next slide. And just a little background on the tricultural myth. In the late 1800s, L. Bradford Prince, who would go on to be the territorial governor of New Mexico, was trying to achieve statehood and monetary gain for New Mexico through the use of the tricultural myth, because many other states throughout the U.S. who had smaller populations had been admitted into statehood, but their populations were made up of largely Anglo people. So you can see the racist rhetoric here. It's the three groups are the Pueblos, the Mexicans, and the Americans. So from its origin, these other people were not even considered Americans. And the myth asserts that there's three separate ethnic groups that exist in harmony, and it thought it was interesting, just the Americans whose energy and enterprise are bringing all the appliances of modern science and invention to develop this almost limitless resources which nature has bestowed upon us. So I think this kind of paves the way for nuclear colonialism and the military-industrial complex. You got a bunch of pretty scary rhetoric up here. And it also links the Native Americans to the past and the Mexicans to conquistadors, which I don't think anybody wants to be linked to either one of those.
So in this slide, you see the native indigenous people commodifying their culture and working the land. I also wanted to comment a little bit about the fact that the University of New Mexico is one of the largest native serving institutions in the United States. And I think it's absolutely criminal that we force students to live in halls named after Oñate, who cut off the leg of like every indigenous person from the Zuni Acoma Pueblo over, or every fighting age male over the age of like 14. Then go to the next one. Then right here you see like the Chicano, Mexicano, or Hispanic, Latinx people also doing manual labor, which they're with the church in the background, you know. Go to the next one. And then.
So this slide is shows the Anglo side of the the tricultural myth. So everyone in this on this canvas is white. The baby is white, and we thought that kind of symbolized like that they're saying the future belongs to white people. And what this slide is kind of saying is like really like the only important technological advancements and like science things belonged to the Anglo race, as if like indigenous peoples or people of color didn't contribute anything to this field. Next slide, please. And so then like this canvas kind of romanticized like Anglo culture. It's like, first of all, the white person's the only one with any facial features, and then he's centered in the canvas, and this is kind of saying like indigenous and people of color wouldn't have gotten anywhere without white man's help, which I'm sure we all know is completely false.
So when we changed the racist seal, one of the demands was that UNM would take down these murals, and at the moment they haven't, but hopefully we're starting a conversation of correcting like these like historical wrongs, such as these inaccurate representations and repatriation of sacred artifacts that UNM holds.
So in the end, we thought that our panel discussion had a really good outcome. We created a safe space for people to kind of voice their concerns, their complaints. We actually had a lot of people who worked in the library come to our event and discuss how they felt seeing these murals every day for however long that they'd worked here. Students who lived on campus and how they felt about having to see this and what it meant to them as an indigenous person or a person of color. So right now it was also a good space for discussion on how we're gonna fix the problem and what we can do. We even had someone get in contact with one of our speakers, and they are looking into the legality of the process of getting it removed, since at this point I'm not sure if UNM is gonna do it for us, but we're just gonna have to take matters into our own hands.
All right. So I just want to, a reminder to the audience, please do not heckle the students. Please create a safe space for these students. This is a scary thing to do, to present their research, that I'm throwing them in the deep end here, having them present in front of you. And they worked hard, so we want to celebrate their work. And I just want to say one thing about that last group. So they put together this event and invited so many people, and it was packed. It was packed. And I don't think something like that has ever happened necessarily in that exact way. There's been a lot of work around this mural over the years, and they honored that work. But there's kind of a momentum growing, and so I really want to celebrate that. And I also want to say about Jana's work, that her art is in the lobby, the beautiful woodblock pieces that you saw her creating. So please be sure to take some time to go into the lobby and see her work and talk to her, talk to the artists, talk to the students, and also take in all of the other art that's out there. So next up we have Trenton Ward, who had the bad luck or the good luck of being in 2 of my classes.
Hello, good afternoon. My project was examining the nuclear legacies and Superfund sites as like social determinants of health here in the state of New Mexico. Today I'll start off by providing some context, providing a basic definition of social determinants of health, and as well social determinants of health framework, and the research question. The research question driving this paper was, does living near a Superfund site impact health outcomes? And then I'll go over my research methods, define Superfund, a snapshot of a Superfund site, and then the results, and finally a conclusion. Race proved to be the most significant among variables tested in association with location of commercial and hazardous waste facilities. This represented a consistent national pattern according to Toxic Waste and Race in the United States, a national report on racial and social economic characteristics of communities with hazardous waste sites. So the social determinants of health defined by the World Health Organization is the condition in which people are born, grow, work, and live and age in the wider set of forces and systems of shaping the conditions of daily life, shaping the conditions of daily life. So this is the context in which people live their lives, which includes like in systems of colonialism, patriarchy, and poverty. So basically, a Superfund site are sites that that the EPA pretty much has to clean up. They're just contaminated sites. It's informally called Superfund. These include like mines, landfills, oil spills, a variety of different environmental. My bad. Can we go to the next one? So I'm using survey data conducted by the RWJF Center for Health Policy at UNM. It focused on investigating the relationship between social determinants and health outcomes in the state of New Mexico. The study relies on a sample provided by a mix of cell phone and landline household, as well as like an online survey, and they interviewed 1,505 people responded to this, and all of the interviewers were also bilingual too. So the survey had so out of that 1,505 people interviewed, 109 of those lived lived in zip codes with the Superfund site. I split I split them into two groups to compare their how they responded and to see if there was any correlation between living in a zip code with a Superfund site and higher rates of cancer or asthma or different health outcomes. You can go next. I hypothesized that the survey data would reflect the trend of higher reported rates of cancer and health problems for people who live in Superfund site areas. I was originally going to include Los Alamos and Church Rock, but unfortunately there were no respondents from those areas. But I did add Tularosa because to the Superfund site group because of the legacy of the first Trinity test. I also wanted to see if there was any significant percentages and differences among them in racial and gender categories, as well as in formal education and reported incomes. So here's a map of the Superfund sites here in the state of New Mexico. We have 20 of them, and most of them are located on the Rio Grande. Two here in Albuquerque are located in the South Valley, which is historically been like a Chicanx, Latinx community. And go to the next slide. So these are just a list of all the Superfund sites. Next one, please. Here's the Laguna Jack Powell mine, which is we visited during one of our field trips, and basically this mine dispossessed the Laguna people of their culture, of their land, and of their water, basically, and caused a lot of health problems. So these are the kind of sites that we're talking about here, and this is a uranium mine. Go to the next. So here are some of the demographics. Most of the people interviewed were U.S. born. A larger percent of people living in Superfund site areas were born in New Mexico, and they also reported people living in near Superfund sites also had reported having a familiar connection to the land also than those who did not. So here are some of the reports. Some of the respondents. They're pretty even, like on high cholesterol, diabetes, like heart disease, obesity, cancer, even. But here's where there's like significant disparities in areas such as high blood pressure, asthma, and higher rates of mental health problems in this. Also, people report lower. There was a lower rate of people claiming the identity of white living next to Superfund sites, and also women tended to live in zip codes with Superfund sites more than those who didn't. Then here's a look at some of the incomes. People living in areas without Superfunds tend to make more. They also tended to have more formal education as well. The data showed disparities between the sample groups in disease prevalence. People living near Superfund sites reported significantly higher rates of asthma and high blood pressure. Those who do not reported experiencing less mental health problems. There are also disparities among racial, gender, and education and economic lines. More women reported living in zip codes with Superfund funds, as well as those in with lower education and income. The Superfund group also tended to be made up of higher percentages of folks who identified in some racial categories other than white. This project echoes findings from the recent study done by the New Mexico Women organization that showed socioeconomic determinants such as income inequalities and the intersection of race and place impact women's health and well-being. They also found that that environmental contamination and pollution undermine community health. That's it. And then I painted this too, and if you want to email me, thank you.
All right, we just have a couple more student presentations. As you can see, some of them combine art and interdisciplinary approaches to looking at these topics, which, as we've talked about all weekend, is really important as far as getting the full picture. So I hope you're getting inspired here. All right, next up we have Alexandra Quijano.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alexandra, and I was in Eileen's Nuclear New Mexico class. What I decided to do for my project was to create a basic overview for children who are in elementary school level or still at the level where they're reading with their parents, so that the knowledge would go from the children to the people who are reading around them. And I wanted to do this because until I took this class in my last year of college, I didn't know a lot of the stuff that we're learning about, and I feel like I felt that I didn't have enough time to do enough with the information as I would have if I had learned about it sooner. So my goal was to include enough about the nuclear industry and information about radiation that you would have a basic overview and understanding of it to do something with the information while also not overloading kids and their parents or making it too political or kind of scary, because that ended up being like an issue, right? It's a really daunting topic to talk about. So my hope is that after creating a book like this, that we can start to change the idea that the radiation that we have in our environment and the creation of nuclear energy and radioactive weapons, to change it from being okay to something that we talk about and we all know about and we can change. So what I had to go through to create this book was to think about what is important, what do you need to know, and what can be left out for this age level of kids. And then I wanted to, at the end and during the inside of pages, to explain a little bit about the information that I'm giving and kind of give a little bit of empowerment to whoever's reading the book, so that you may get this frightening information, but then you understand it and you have a little bit more courage to take on these topics. So I'm just going to give a little overview about what I talked about in the book. I made a little mock of the book. It's being printed now, so it'll be out later. So if you wanted to look at this after, it's here. And I also partnered up with a friend of mine who's an artist, and he created some illustrations for the book as well. So first, the important thing is to know the difference between non-ionizing radiation and ionizing radiation, because the difference is very important. And we need to know what people are talking about when they tell you this is how much radiation you get in a year, but you need to know what kind of radiation it is. So I went into that a little bit in the front. Then I talked about the basis of the nuclear industry that we mostly get when we're in school. So I talked about the Trinity site and also the bombings on Japan. But then I went into the less known testing after that, and also accidents that happened that I didn't know about, which kind of disturbed me. But But I left out the political part of the history because I feel like that part of the narrative people tend to change just depending on what your views are. And I feel like it should be up to the children reading to decide what they think about it. So then I put in the nuclear decay timeline, but a very simplified version, because it's easier to understand that it's a problem for a long time. So when you tell someone there's this radiation and it's a big problem, in your mind it's kind of, oh, people don't talk about it, it must kind of go away. But I wanted them to understand that it's a problem that generations and generations will have to deal with, including their own. But I wanted to leave out the too much detail in between that may confuse you and make you kind of turn away from the information. Then I talked a little bit about how radiation spreads. So from the environment to people to water to the different tools used in the process. Just a little overview of how that would happen. And then I went into a little more detail about the impacts that radiation has on the body, because that's more right where you're focused on. How does it influence me? So I talked about the difference between a healthy body and a body that has radiation inside, where this radiation is stored, and a little bit about how, like iodine tablets and things like that, how you can try to prevent it if you're feeling a little scared about the information. And then I tried to leave out the doom and gloom of how well or not well treatment works and the testings that have been done of why they know that this happens to the body. Then I went into the nuclear waste chain because it's important to know how it actually happens. So we started out in mining, and then each step we have waste. So the mining creates waste from tailings and the tools used around that. And then after that to enrichment, and then either to energy or to making weapons. So I just wanted to explain where it comes from and then where it goes and how that's a problem, because there's so many steps, and each step releases more waste into the environment. Then I thought it was important to explain what waste is, because the term is kind of abstract in this context, because when you think of waste without knowing what this is, it kind of just sounds like you threw some paper, there's a mine there, and they have garbage, and that's the waste that we're talking about. But I wanted to make it clear that waste from radiation is something that is going to be a problem for a really long time. It's been contaminated by radiation, and now we have to do something with it and get rid of it, and we really don't have a way to do that. Then on the same note, I went into a little more detail on the different types of waste. So low level, high level, intermediate, and kind of discussing how there are different levels of waste, but they're all very dangerous to us just because the way they are made changes their categorization. And then a little bit more about the nuclear reactor waste. So how that is actually more dangerous because it is going through fission for so much longer. Then I included a little map of the closed and open nuclear reactors in the United States, just to give a perspective of where they are and where they aren't, and kind of let you look at that, see where you live, and know your relation to the industry. And then I left out the proposed plants and spills and storage and things like that, because I feel like that's a little more heated and a little more scary to think about when you're a child. Then on my final pages, I wanted to reflect on the information. So kind of give an overview of what you've learned and what you might be feeling about it, and then give a little bit of what you can do now. So be aware of your surroundings and tell people, be informed, and then attempt to stop further reactors in your area or protect your body in your own way. And then I also included a little bit about how we are trying to stop the radiation process, and also to figure out ways which the environment we can help, like with mushrooms and how they reduce radiation in soils and things like that, just to kind of leave it on a lighter note than all of this information coming down on you. And so, like I said at the beginning, the hope is that this book will empower kids to create change and know more about their environment while they're younger, and then have it as something you think about when you're growing up instead of something you learn about when you're already like an adult. So that was my hope from creating the book. Thank you.
All right, and maybe we can pass Alex's book around so that people can get a sense of what she created there. Next up, we have Natasha Phelps.
Okay, so hi, my name's Tasha. I was in Eileen's Nuclear New Mexico class, and I am majoring in philosophy here at UNM. This video covers some of the doubts and remorse of the Manhattan Project scientists, and kind of how they felt when they were making the bombs and after they were dropped. I tried to capture their uncertainty and regret they had that they carried with them through their lives. So, enjoy.
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
I'm sure people wonder how the atomic bombs were created in the first place. Did the Manhattan Project scientists know they were creating some of the deadliest superweapons known to man, paving way for even deadlier ones? What were the philosophies behind the bombs? The head scientists knew what they were creating, but they were unaware of what the results would be. However, they did know it would be powerful and destructive. After the Trinity test, it was clear that this new type of bomb was more terrifying than anything humankind had ever seen. This was proven to be true when 2 atomic bombs were dropped on August 6, 1945 on Hiroshima and August 9, 1945 on Nagasaki, Japan. More than 80,000 innocent civilians died instantly in Hiroshima and 40,000 in Nagasaki. Women, children, fathers, mothers, innocent people. What did the scientists have to say about this?
I would like to think now that that I, at the time of the German defeat, that I would have stopped, taken stock, thought it all over very carefully, and that I would have walked away from Los Alamos at that time. And I, in terms of all of everything that I believe in, before and during and after the war, I cannot understand why I did not make that act. On the other hand, it simply was not in the air. I do not know of a single instance of anyone who had made that suggestion or who did leave at the time. There might have been someone that I didn't know, but at the time, it just was not something that was part of our lives. Our life was directed to do one thing. It's as though we had been programmed to do that, and we, as automatons, were doing it. I organized a small meeting at our building. I think the title was The Impact of the Gadget on Civilization. Hoppy tried to persuade me not to have it. I don't know quite why, but he certainly did try to dissuade me. On the other hand, I went ahead and did hold the meeting, and perhaps between 30 and 50 people came. Hoppy came too, which added always added tone to any meeting. We did discuss whether we should go on or not, and in the context of what was happening in the world. Of course, it was called in the context that perhaps what we were doing was morally wrong. Particularly, Hoppy pointed out that, but it would be well that the world knew about the possibility of an atomic bomb rather than it be something that would be kept secret while the United Nations was being formed. On that basis, on that logical basis,
Oppenheimer had the same remorse after the bomb for not informing Japan how disastrous this weapon was, but yet did not regret building it. He stated, "I have no remorse about the making of the bomb in Trinity. That was done right. As for how we used it, I understand why it happened and appreciate with what nobility those men with whom I've worked made the decision. But I do not have the feeling that it was done right. The ultimatum to Japan was full of pious platitudes. Our government should have acted with more foresight and clarity in telling the world and Japan what the bomb meant."
The information wasn't needed in such a hurry anymore, but it just would have been against the culture of the time and place to stop and say, this is too dangerous, let's not do it. After the Trinity explosion, Oppenheimer said, now the physicists have known sin. I had not earlier heard any statements doubting that this was a good thing to do. I'm sure that older and wiser people probably did have such discussions. I was a 19-year-old kid. I don't know that that statement of Oppenheimer's really contributed to the discussion afterward, but it was a bit of a shock when we heard about it.
What could the United States have done differently? Did we have to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to force their surrender? According to the Los Angeles Times, Truman called it the greatest thing in history. America's military leaders didn't share his exuberance. 7 of America's 8 five-star officers in 1945, Jens Dwight Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, and Henry Arnold, as well as Administrator William Levy, Chester Nimitz, Ernest King, and William Halsey, later called the atomic bombings either militarily unnecessary, morally reprehensible, or both. Lee, who is Truman's personal chief of staff, wrote in his memoir that the Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender.
The decision to drop the second bomb on Nagasaki after such a short time, even at the time, I had my doubts about that. It seemed unnecessary. We had not given them time to organize themselves to surrender.
And many generals even stated that dropping the bombs were not necessary for the surrender of Japan. Many of the people who worked at Trinity, from scientists to workers of all kinds, put all their effort into creating and building the bombs, but not all of them agreed with what they were used for in the end. As seen by just the few people in this video, they had understood that what they had created was such a powerful weapon that had the capability of destroying vast amounts of land, taking the lives of tens of thousands of people, not even including mining victims and later victims of the fallout at Trinity, the people of Tularosa. This was such a huge landmark in history that marked the beginning of a new era where one person could have the godlike powers by controlling a weapon of this magnitude. In the end, we as people need to learn that based on the remorse and sorrow of the scientists at the Manhattan Project, nuclear technology advancements and production must come to an end.
we have one more student presentation, and then we'll do a quick Q&A with the students. Gabrielle Hines-Brown.
All right, so I did some research on fear, mortality, and popular culture in a nuclear age. Next. So some of the questions I wanted to answer in this project were, how do we define the nuclear age, and was it really from the 1940s to the 1990s, as some historians argue, or are we currently in a nuclear age right now? There's some ambiguities with that. Second, how did the bomb affect our collective notion of mortality? And how do we think of the death in an age with weapons of mass destruction? What is nuclear fear and how do we cope with it? And how does popular culture affect how the public perceives these issues? Next. So I'm going to start off with the conception of the bomb, which is what started it all. So the invention of the bomb, it instigated a shift in how we grasp the concept of death. So because we now have this tool that people in power can use to kill millions of people, we have to grasp this concept of death as an individual and also as a species. So Robert Lifton, he had this quote, the appearance of nuclear weapons in the 1940s evoked an image that of man's extermination of himself as a species with his own technology. So he also brought up, like I said, the concept of death versus total death. And he said that the fundamental psychic deformation of the nuclear age is the merging of the two, associating individual death with total death. So psychologists recognized this shift during the Cold War. So a lot of behavioral studies were conducted to kind of examine how people were affected by this. Studies show that there was a very prominent presence of nuclear anxiety among children and adults. Mostly children, however, they exhibited a lot of signs of distress, and they themselves said that the source of their anxiety were nuclear war, which a lot of it did originate from the propaganda shown in schools about the Soviets and how to keep yourself safe in event of a nuclear attack. And as kids grew older, the fear became more of a subconscious thing. But interest in nuclear war was definitely sustained through popular culture. So the authors Zeman and Amundsen, they categorize atomic popular culture into 4 categories. Number 1 was early atomic culture. And this was characterized by the celebration of World War II ending, patriotism, and also the new breakthroughs in science brought about by the nuclear age. Second was high atomic culture. There's a lot of media surrounding the uranium boom as something that was exciting and prosperous. There was also tourism involving that during that age. And then post-atomic culture. Post-atomic culture. The authors, they said it was from 1991 to present, but they wrote it in 2004, so I argue that it did end around that time in 2004, and that we are now in a new age of atomic culture. My goal was not to make this presentation a political statement, but to ignore this would be to ignore a huge elephant in the room, because this is serious and we can't ignore it, and it needs to be acknowledged that we have a president who has basically inadvertently threatened to start a nuclear war with North Korea. And So because of that, the fears and anxiety from the Cold War are no longer dormant. And so I have observed the 3 characteristics from this new age, so to say, that we've entered. So number 1, mockery. So I found this quote, mockery does not entrain fear, but dispels it. And that's by Spencer Wirt. And so we're not taking imminent nuclear war seriously. I mean, in this room we are, I think. But as a whole, I don't think we're taking it seriously enough. And we cope with it by making fun of it, and I think that's been propagated by the age of social media and stuff like that. So I've also observed flat-out denial of nuclear issues and conflicts. I have come across articles that say that they claim that it's illegal for Trump to launch nuclear codes. It could be illegal under international law, but under the constitutional law, it's totally legal. We can't just deny that. It's a fact. I have also seen people deny that radiation is an issue. Next. So that's my favorite one. We are also in a new age of dissent and activism. It's been going on forever, but I think that we have entered a new age where people are really waking up and realizing that we have to address these issues. I'd like to